Hopefully you can hear me well. I think this talk follows on relatively nicely from a lot of what was said in the last session. So firstly, I thought it might be interesting, or at least polite, to explain who I am. I'm Rob Mars. I'm the Head of Education at the Law Society of Scotland. We're the professional body for all Scottish solicitors, so we regulate and represent those members. We have 12,000 of them around the world. Secondly, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I am very painfully aware that I am a straight, white, able-bodied, married man from a Western country. Let's face it, I work for an establishment institution. It would be difficult for me to claim in any way that I was from a disadvantaged background. That said, diversity to me is a little like beauty, and it should be considered as something beyond skin deep. It's not just our gender or our ethnicity or our sexuality, but it can also be about our background, our experience, our personality, and how our brains are wired. So in a way, I'm probably what people expect when they hear the Law Society of Scotland. It's probably going to be some dreadfully dull white guy. But ultimately, I'm not actually a lawyer, and hopefully I never will be unless things go very badly wrong in the future. So my job is to make sure that solicitors qualifying of the highest quality and stay of the highest quality. But as well as that, I have a focus on equal opportunities in the legal profession. And in fact, the Law Society of Scotland has a statutory duty under one of our guiding acts to promote equal opportunities in the profession. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about building on some of the topics in the last session, talk about diversity in the legal profession, what it means, why it matters, and explain the business benefits of caring about diversity. And for those of you who are tech heads, a little like myself, there'll be a little about technology in there too. So I believe sort of two things that I hope to convince you of over the next half hour. Firstly, pursuing greater levels of diversity in the legal profession is a good thing in and of itself. Secondly, pursuing greater levels of diversity in the legal profession is good for business as a stimulator for creativity, of innovation, and because clients want it. A big problem in this space is that people talk about slightly different terms. So they talk about equality, equity, inclusion, diversity. Let's park those discussions for a moment. And today, I'm going to talk about diversity as an aspiration, that the legal profession ought to reflect, in broad terms, the public that it serves. I realize that all jurisdictions are different. I realize we've got a global audience today, so we'll all be a little different. But when considering diversity, maybe ask yourself, and it's a question I ask myself about my jurisdiction, is, does your legal profession, does my legal profession reflect in broad terms the public that it serves? And the answer in most countries is no. Even in countries that are doing well in this area, is probably not as much as we would like. But what do I mean by reflecting the public? It's pretty simple, that people from all backgrounds in a society should be able to look at their legal system and see in broad terms something that looks a little like the society that they live in. Lawyers of all genders, all ethnicities, all sexualities, all social backgrounds, and should be able to make it in the profession, and that those characteristics should not count for them or against them. But so much of what today I'll talk about is from my experience in Scotland, but I hope that that's useful to you elsewhere in the world. And ultimately, I think it's important because most people in society and most people in the profession would agree that it's a special privilege to be a lawyer. In almost all jurisdictions, being a lawyer allows you to do certain things that other people can't do. So lawyers are expected to fight for justice for all people across society. So it's surely important that all people from society can think about becoming lawyers and become lawyers and bring their unique experiences and backgrounds to the profession. First of all, I'm just going to speak a little about gender now. I'm very aware you've just had an amazing panel of fantastic female lawyers talking about gender equality. And now you have a guy talking about gender equality. So I get it, but allow me to explain my interest. This is perhaps, particularly in jurisdictions like Scotland, where we have seen historically slow progress sped up enormously. 100 years ago, women were not allowed to be solicitors in Scotland. Now women make up a majority of the profession. So we've seen, in historic terms, massive change in a relatively short amount of time. But, you know, ultimately, women make up half of the population. Do they make up, in your jurisdiction, half of the legal profession? And if they do, which they do in my jurisdiction, 53%, are they evenly distributed within the profession? Or, like the speakers that we heard only a moment ago, are there issues around pay and progression? And if there are issues around pay and progression, how can we get rid of those issues? So as I say, a majority of women in the profession in Scotland, a majority of people in the profession, sorry, are women. That's only going to intensify. 2/3 of the people coming in are women each year. But whilst this is welcome progress, we know that women are on the wrong side of a pay gap and on the wrong side of a progression gap. We know that the average woman in the legal profession is paid 23% less than the average man. That's come down a lot over the last 5 years, but it's still a significant gap, which has lifelong impacts when you consider earnings, pension, and so on and so on. And then, whilst some of that may be attributable to equal pay issues, which we hope should be stamped out 45 years after the Equal Pay Act was instituted in the UK, there is a progression gap. We know that women take longer to become senior associates. They stay senior associates longer, are far more likely to leave the profession in their 30s, are less likely to be equity partners when they make partner, and all the things that flow from that. So we realize that really, really talented people come in to the profession and we chase them away. And when you think about it in those fairly broad terms, that's just not, first, it's not right, but secondly, it seems bizarre. And then if you look across Scotland, UK, the rest of Europe, and I would imagine the rest of the world, in most countries, women are far less likely to be judges. I know there's a few notable exceptions, but that holds than their male counterparts. And despite activity across Europe, we know that this is likely to take decades rather than years. So first of all, a question: how many of us, when we hear the term gender equality, mentally compartmentalize gender equality as a women's issue? Because if we do, we're probably not going to solve gender equality anytime soon. Because nobody really, just to use an analogy, would argue that poverty is solely the issue of the poorest people in society. We wouldn't argue that somebody who went to an underperforming school, or there was the existence of an underperforming school, only mattered to people who went to that school. We would naturally see that poverty existing in a society, or a bad school existing in a society, necessarily impacts us all. And in exactly the same way, whilst women, of course, would benefit from greater levels of gender equality, so would guys. And when 50%, or 49% it probably is, because women are slightly more populous in the UK, if nearly 50% of the people in the discussion just don't turn up to the discussion, or disproportionately in the legal sector, powerful people don't turn up to the discussion, we're not going to see change very quickly. I would say, though, we have seen strides very, very quickly over the last 30 years. In 1990, roughly 25% of the profession were female, now a majority. But if we've done okay, and by no means have we reached gender equality in Scotland in the profession, and many of the things that were spoke about so eloquently in the previous session about mentorship, but also about measurement, about targets, about positive action. All of those things are necessary on an individual, organizational, and societal or profession-wide level. If we've done okay on gender, and I would give us an okay, not great, not amazing, we're probably behind the curve on ethnicity and on disability. I was very struck recently when speaking to the CEO of a racial inclusion NGO, who noted to me that the only place in the justice system in Scotland where Black people are overrepresented is in prison. The thing is, as shocking as that statement is, the CEO is correct. We know that people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds are less likely to be lawyers than their white counterparts. But we also know at school, certainly in the UK, people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds will outperform their white candidates. Now, those two things don't necessarily stack up. How can a group that is disproportionately doing well in school-based examinations also be not coming to the profession? What are we doing to turn them off? And again, we need to think quite carefully here, because it's not just a case of mixing up the ethnic makeup of the profession, even though that would be desirable. But we have to make sure that there's diversity within diversity. As our own Justice Minister in Scotland said, there's little progress if diversity simply means privately educated people from an Asian background replace privately educated people from a white background. We need to ensure that people from all backgrounds, whether they're from the richest in society or from the poorest in society, can survive, arrive and thrive in the profession. And then finally, before I move on to some potential solutions, I wanted to focus very briefly on disability. I was very taken with, or I am very taken with the inclusion, the social model of disability, which argues that what disables people is not their individual impairment, but rather decisions everyone else in society makes, which put up barriers. And when you think about disability like that, it's actually quite a humbling thought that some of my decisions might have inadvertently disabled somebody else. But the great thing about this is we can then choose how to move forward and be more inclusive. So we really need to start thinking as a society and as a profession, as law firms, is to think, how can we design our processes and services to make sure everyone can participate? Because we'll end up with happier clients, which is always good, but we'll also end up with happier staff, which again is always good. We're some way from that. We know in Scotland that many disabled solicitors do not disclose their disability and do not seek the reasonable adjustments they're legally entitled to. And if they don't seek those adjustments and don't get those adjustments, that will have a necessary impact on their, or necessarily have an impact rather, on their happiness, on their productivity, on their well-being, on the staff relations, and probably on their income. So the question when it comes to disability should never ever be, can a disabled lawyer do the job? Because the answer, of course, is yes. But rather, how can we make sure that anyone with qualities that we need to do the job can thrive in our organisation? And that puts the onus on us rather than trying to fit people into boxes in our organisation. And think for a moment, just for a moment, about people on the autistic spectrum. It's well known, I think, that despite some social challenges, many people with autism have extremely powerful intellectual skills. And it's been estimated, this is a Bank of England report, has said that they think up to 50% of Silicon Valley's innovators may have Asperger's syndrome, which is on the autistic spectrum. How easy, though, is it for those people with autism to thrive in the legal sector? I mean, I think we would all, nobody would argue with the contention that Silicon Valley is perhaps more an innovative place generally than the legal sector. And why would we chase those people away? So you may have heard all this and said, well, that's fine, Rob. Gender equality is a nice aspiration. Racial equality is a nice aspiration. Being better at including disabled people is a nice aspiration. All sounds good, but so what? Does it work? What's in it for the company? And, you know, we'll disagree because I think it's the right thing to do. But what about the economics? And simply put, there's no debate. We know that diversity works. We know this simply from looking around us. If you look at the fastest growing, thriving creative hubs in terms of cities, London, San Francisco, Singapore, Sydney, Paris, Dubai, even here in Edinburgh, the common denominator is the diverse pool of people who work there. And if we turn from cities to organizations that we work for and ask ourselves, what hallmarks the most creative, fast-growing, productive and successful companies? The common denominator again is diversity. One of the previous speakers mentioned the McKinsey study. I'll mention another, probably the gold standard when it comes to diversity, which is Why Diversity Matters, which McKinsey did a number of years ago. And what it showed is that companies in the top quartile for gender and ethnic diversity at board level are more likely to have financial returns above the industry median. And firms that are the other way are more likely to be below the industry median. And the Confederation of British Industries, the Chartered Institute of Professional Development have published very similar statistics. Now, these aren't goof-offs, you know, these are people who are deadly serious about what they do. Ultimately, if McKinsey, the go-to global advisor on basically business renewal and organization consulting, is saying diversity matters, maybe it's time to listen. And I suppose one of the things that one of the previous speakers mentioned that they often have children running in. My children are about to run in any moment from school, so my apologies in advance. But what age do you think we reach our creative peak? It's horrifying for the father of a 6-year-old to learn that we probably reach our creative peak at 5. So the next time somebody tells you to grow up, try and remember that. But the reason for this is because children engage in what is known as divergent thinking. That is, they aren't tethered by convention or educational status. Now, I'm afraid to say it's too late for any of us on this call to recreate our childhood brains, but we can, in our organizations, do the next best thing, which is to create divergent thinking within and across our organization. That means building teams which are rich and diverse in their backgrounds, personalities, and thought processes. It's no surprise that the world's best performing companies build this into their ethos. Diversity has been shown to make organizations more resilient. That's a Bank of England finding. We already know that human decisions are riddled with bias, hubris, and groupthink. These impair our judgment. I'm as guilty as the next person. They make for poor decision making. But the best way to ensure to avoid these is to ensure lots of diverse and different voices and thought processes and experiences are around the table helping make the decision. If you've got 10 people like me around the table making the decision, you're going to come up maybe with a solution, but you're going to come up with one voice. If you have 10 very different looking, sounding people with different backgrounds around the table, you have a much better discussion. We know that hubris and groupthink was one of the main reasons why banks failed in 2008. It was likely a factor in many of the law firm failures across Scotland, the UK, and the globe that came out of that recession. And so it was a lack of diversity that was the cause of that failure, and greater diversity, to use the language of the day, is the vaccine against such failures. Now, millennia ago, Plato said that necessity is the mother of all invention. I disagree. I think diversity could at least argue that claim, but it's certainly the father of all risk management. Now, we are all very aware that we have lots ahead of us. We are battling back from a global pandemic, which has hit every business globally pretty much. Those of us in the UK and Europe, I don't know what's going on in the news, it changes every minute, are worried about the uncertainties of Brexit. Many businesses are wondering how they can reduce their impact on the client, on the climate rather, or get better with technology. It's understandable that many businesses therefore think diversity is a nice thing to do, something to do in the good times. For me, this is wrong-headed and the wrong way around. Now is the time to encourage diversity. We need to press the accelerator rather than the brake and deliver meaningful equality. Well, why? Because an environment of acute uncertainty and ambiguity, which we find ourselves in right now, is one in which the organizational returns for greater diversity are at their greatest. The greatest safeguard against the vagaries of geopolitics or the pandemic is a workforce with diversity of thought and experience. That means lawyers qualifying age 22, but also lawyers qualifying aged 42 who have changed careers from other industries and who have been clients. It means partners who went to elite private schools and partners who work 3 jobs to pay for their degree. It means partnerships that aren't all male or all female or all white or all able-bodied or all straight. How does the legal profession embed technology properly? Well, that's a whole other topic, but by organizations ensuring that they hire people and reward people from all backgrounds, including people from more STEM subjects, and developing new roles and new career structures for people who want to work in hybrid roles like accredited legal technologists or legal engineers. And you have to recognize that it's not just down to the lawyers, it's down to the whole new team. And how can we ensure that trust is rebuilt amongst disenchanted customers and stakeholders when they're pushing all the time for more for less? Well, you can do that by having a workforce that looks like the clients they serve and can understand the perspective of clients better. So for me, diversity is the key to all of those things. It's the way out of this crisis rather than something to be put on the back burner for better times. So what else can you do, or what can we all do? There are 3 answers to that. What can we do as individuals? What can we do as organizations? And what can we do as professions? So firstly, individuals. It's understandable that as individuals, when faced with something complex or big ahead of us, we feel there's little we can do. Well, let's focus on Scotland for a second. There are 12,000 members in the Scottish legal profession. Imagine if each one of those did one thing to promote diversity in the profession or equal opportunities in the profession. That would be 12,000 small steps. Now imagine they did a second and a third. So there's lots you can do very quickly. And there's loads people can do. 1, take the Harvard implicit bias test. It's free. 2, mentor junior professionals. You'll find it rewarding, and so will they. 3, if you're a client, ask legal services providers questions about how they are improving their equality. 4, if you're a guy, never take part in all male panels and tell the organizer why. 5, if you're a man and involved in childcare, lead by example and talk about it rather than slinking off at the door at 5 p.m. and not saying anything about it. 6, support colleagues who work flexibly and make sure flexible working actually exists properly. 7, take shared parental leave if you can. 8, always call out bullying and harassment. I could go on all day. There's hundreds and hundreds of things that we could all do. Organizations, the next level up, have more power and there's more that they can do. They could move to a contextualized recruitment system, which is revolutionizing how people are recruited straight out of universities. Show off role models, provide mentors, make sure the policies that you have aren't just for HR, but actually are imbued throughout the organization. Look at your supply chains. There's so much there. And similarly, at a profession-wide level, report. Make sure you have the data so you know where the blockages are, and then you can be smart about how you respond. There's no point saying, well, we think that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people are underrepresented in the profession. What's the point in thinking? Find out and know. But ultimately, we need to get much better at understanding and measuring the subtleties of diversity. We need to better understand cognitive diversity about how people think differently, and socioeconomic diversity as well. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm very happy to take any questions and can give chapter and verse on what we're doing here at the Society, but thank you very much.